September 8th, 1939, 7 a.m. London. What if a nation went to war and discovered that bread, milk, and sugar could become as rare as ammunition? What if a mother had to choose between tea and butter, not because of poverty, but because the world was burning? On the morning of September 8th, 1939, London woke to a new kind of battlefield, not one of bombs and bullets, but of empty shop shelves and rationed books stamped with numbers instead of hope. At 7 a.m., queues formed outside grocery stores before the sun had fully risen. People stood quietly, holding paper coupons that decided how much they could eat, how long their families could last, and how much strength they could save for tomorrow. The war had not yet reached every street with fire, but it had already entered every kitchen. A woman was heard saying, "We are not fighting with guns today. We are fighting with spoons." Her words captured the strange reality of a nation learning to survive without certainty. Milk was measured in ounces. Meat was weighed like gold. Sugar became something spoken about, not seen. Children asked why their plates looked smaller. Fathers wondered how they would work on half a meal. Elderly citizens remembered the hunger of earlier wars and feared it had returned. Every household faced the same silent enemy, shortage. Yet this was not chaos. It was order forced by necessity. Each person received a ration book, each page a reminder that food had become part of the war effort. Eating was no longer private. It was patriotic, regulated, and shared with millions who stood in the same line of waiting. Behind the counters, shopkeepers apologized again and again, not for high prices, but for having nothing left. Ships that once carried wheat and fruit were now targets at sea. Fields that once grew crops were short of workers. The war had stretched its hand into the soil itself. Still, something unexpected happened. Gardens appeared where flowers once grew. Lawns turned into vegetable patches, parks filled with rows of cabbage and carrots. People who had never planted anything began to dig, because hunger had taught them how. This was the beginning of a quiet revolution, not one led by soldiers, but by civilians with spades and seed packets. Not one announced with speeches, but with posters that read, "Dig for victory." The struggle for food became a struggle for survival. The question was no longer how to win battles, but how to feed a nation under siege. How long could people endure without enough, and how much could ordinary citizens give before there was nothing left to give? This story is not about generals or weapons. It is about ration cards and garden soil. It is about a country learning that survival could be grown from the ground up. And to understand why this struggle mattered, we must step back into the world that made hunger a national mission, leading directly into the background of how and why rationing became unavoidable. By the late 1930s, the United Kingdom depended heavily on imported food. More than half of its meat, grain, and sugar came from overseas. When war began in September 1939, sea routes became dangerous lifelines. Merchant ships faced constant threats, and each sinking meant fewer supplies reaching the ports. The government understood that food could no longer be treated as a normal market product. It became a strategic resource. Rationing was introduced not to punish civilians, but to prevent starvation and panic. The goal was simple in theory. Everyone would receive a fair share, no matter their wealth or status. Butter, bacon, sugar, and meat were the first items controlled. Soon eggs, milk, and cheese followed. Each citizen carried a ration book that allowed them to buy only what was permitted each week. This system changed daily life in ways no one had imagined before the war. Meals became smaller and more repetitive. Recipes changed. People learned to cook with what they had, not what they wanted. Government leaflets taught families how to make soups from bones, how to stretch flour, and how to replace meat with vegetables. Food became an act of planning, not pleasure. At the same time, farmland faced its own crises. Many farm workers joined the military, leaving fields without hands to harvest crops. Machinery was limited. Fuel was scarce. The nation risked losing not only imported food, but also its own production. A campaign was launched that turned civilians into growers. Public parks, schoolyards, and even sports fields were converted into vegetable gardens. This movement became known as Victory Gardens, a name that connected food with morale rather than hunger. The idea was not heroic in appearance. It involved mud, seeds, and long hours of work, but it carried emotional power. Every carrot grown meant one less ship needed to cross dangerous waters. Every potato harvested meant one more family fed without dependence on fragile supply lines. Women, children, and the elderly became the backbone of this effort. They learned to farm in cities. They learned to preserve food. They learned to live without luxury. Survival became a shared duty. This period revealed how war transforms ordinary routines into acts of shopping turned into waiting. Cooking turned into calculating. Gardening turned into resistance against scarcity. Rationing was not only about food, it was about discipline. It taught people patience. It forced cooperation. It removed the idea that some could eat freely while others starved. Hunger became equalized, and in that equality, a strange unity formed. But this unity did not remove fear. Bombs still fell. Ships still sank. Harvests still failed. Behind every meal was uncertainty. Would next week bring less? Would the winter be harder? Would the gardens be enough? The importance of this moment lies not in numbers of calories, but in human adaptation. Civilians became part of the war through everyday survival. Their kitchens became supply lines. Their gardens became front lines of endurance. And so, from rationed books and dug-up lawns, a larger story began to unfold. A story of how ordinary people fought hunger with discipline and soil, leading directly into the main story of daily struggle, sacrifice, and unexpected strength that followed. On January 8, 1940, at exactly 6 a.m., a bell rang outside a small grocery shop in Birmingham, and a line of people stepped forward with ration books in their hands. This scene was repeated across the United Kingdom, not once, but every week. The war had turned food into a carefully measured resource, and survival into a daily routine. Inside homes, breakfast no longer meant choice. It meant calculation. A slice of bread, a thin layer of margarine, and weak tea without sugar became common. Mothers studied their ration books like maps. Each coupon represented a decision. Save meat for Sunday, or use it today. Children learned new words such as substitute and stretching. Government broadcasts instructed families how to cook creatively. Posters showed smiling characters turning turnips into pies and carrots into puddings. One popular message said, "Waste nothing." Bones became soup. Leftovers became tomorrow's meal. Peels were saved for compost or animal feed. Meanwhile, another transformation was taking place outside the kitchen. Lawns, once trimmed for beauty, were dug up for survival. Flower beds became vegetable plots. Even the lawns outside factories and schools were turned into rows of cabbage and onions. The Dig for Victory campaign spread across the country. It did not use weapons, but shovels. It did not train soldiers, but gardeners. Ordinary citizens became growers of their own food. People who had never touched soil before learned how to plant potatoes and protect seedlings from frost. Children joined as well. Schoolyards became gardens. Teachers replaced some lessons with farming tasks. Students carried watering cans instead of books. This was not play, it was preparation for survival. There were challenges everywhere. Seeds were limited, tools were shared. Pests destroyed crops, weather ignored human plans. A single frost could erase weeks of effort. But people continued because hunger was stronger than frustration. Urban families faced the hardest struggle. With little space, they grew vegetables in boxers, tins, and rooftops. Windowsills held jars of green onions. Bathtubs were sometimes used to store potatoes. Every corner became useful. Losses were quiet but constant. Some families could not grow enough. Some children fell ill due to poor nutrition. Elderly people struggled to adapt to new diets. Food shortages did not kill quickly. They weakened slowly. Technology played a hidden role. New preservation methods were introduced. Drying, bottling, and canning became essential skills. Community kitchens were created to prepare meals for those who could not cook. These kitchens became places of shared survival rather than comfort. Transport also became part of the story. With fuel rationed, farmers had difficulty moving crops to cities. Trains were used to carry vegetables instead of luxury goods. Food routes replaced trade routes. Heroism did not appear in uniforms. It appeared in aprons. A woman who fed 10 neighbors from one pot. A man who worked in a factory by day and in a garden by night. A child who gave up sweets so younger siblings could eat. One woman later wrote in her diary, "We learned to be full with less and strong with nothing." These words reflected a nation discovering endurance in ordinary actions. As months passed, the population adjusted. Recipes improved. Gardens grew larger, skills spread. Hunger remained, but panic faded. Survival became organized. This daily struggle, repeated millions of times, created the turning point of civilian endurance. But the true climax came not from harvest, but from realization that food itself had become a battlefield, and that winning meant not abundance, but balance. This understanding led directly into the climax and resolution of this chapter of survival. Rationing did not come with celebration. It came during the winter when supplies were at their lowest and patience was at its limit. Snow-covered gardens, harvests stopped, imports were delayed. Families stared at empty shelves and wondered how long discipline could last. In that moment, the nation understood that the true test was not hunger, but unity. The rationing system was meant to prevent chaos. Rich and poor received the same amounts. This fairness became the backbone of endurance. People learned that survival was not an individual task, but a shared one. Neighbors exchanged vegetables. Community kitchens served meals to those without fuel or strength. Children collected scraps for compost. Nothing was wasted. The lesson was harsh, but clear. Modern war reached far beyond battlefields. It entered homes and stomachs. It forced civilians to fight with patience instead of weapons. Gradually, the system stabilized. Gardens produced more food than expected. Nutrition programs improved. Health reports showed that despite shortages, some citizens were healthier than before because diets became simpler and more balanced. The resolution was not victory in taste, but victory in survival. The country did not starve. The population endured. Hunger did not break morale. What had begun as emergency control became a culture of resilience. People discovered that dignity could exist even with little. Sharing replaced hoarding. Discipline replaced fear. This story ended not with full plates, but with lasting habits. Waste was no longer acceptable. Food was respected. Gardens became symbols of quiet resistance against scarcity. The lesson was not how to grow vegetables, but how to adapt. War had removed comfort, but it had revealed strength. When peace slowly returned, rationing did not end immediately. It lingered as a reminder of what had been survived. The memory of queues, coupons, and gardens remained in the minds of those who lived through it. This chapter of history teaches that civilians do not only endure war through shelters and silence, but through daily choices. A spoon of soup, a seed in soil, a sorry meal. The climax passed when people realized they could live with less without losing themselves. The resolution came when survival became routine rather than fear. And from this quiet victory of endurance, the story moves toward its final reflection, where hunger becomes memory, and gardens become symbols of how ordinary life can stand against extraordinary hardship. The story of rationing and victory gardens does not end with full tables. It ends with understanding. When the war reduced food to numbers in a book and seeds in the soil, civilians learned that survival was not only about what they received, but about what they shared. Hunger became a teacher, and patience became a form of strength. Families who once measured life by comfort now measured it by balance. A meal was no longer taken for granted. Bread was respected. Vegetables were treasured. Even scraps had value. These habits changed how people thought about food long after the war ended. The gardens were not just places where carrots and potatoes grew. They became places where dignity grew. Children learned responsibility. Elders found purpose. Communities discovered that working together could replace fear with effort. The soil absorbed anxiety and returned hope in the form of small green leaves. Rationing revealed something fragile and powerful about human life. When resources are limited, character is tested. Some struggled, some failed, but many adapted. They did not defeat hunger with abundance. They defeated it with discipline and unity. This chapter of history reminds us that war does not only belong to soldiers. It belongs to kitchens, queues, and quiet sacrifices. It belongs to mothers who watered plants at dawn and workers who carried vegetables after long shifts. Their battle had no medals, but it had meaning. Today, when food is easily available, the memory of rationing feels distant. Yet its lesson remains close. Waste has consequences. Sharing has power. Survival can grow from the smallest seed. The victory gardens faded with time, but their message did not. They showed that ordinary people can protect life even when the world is breaking apart. They showed that endurance does not always shout. Sometimes it grows silently in rows of cabbage and beans. This story is not about victory over hunger, but about respect for what keeps us alive. It is about how civilians faced scarcity without surrendering their humanity. I've just said what's recorded in history. You should find out the real truth yourself. We have written the sources from which we got this story in the description of this video, and we have always been and will be supporters of the oppressed, regardless of their color, race, or country. This world and its creator are also with the oppressed. If this World War II story touched you, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more forgotten civilian stories of World War II. These lessons of survival deserve to be remembered. History lives through awareness. See you in the next World War II story.